evolution and the evolution of spiritual consciousness, which is what consciousness is. And well, I came from an Irish background, a Catholic background, with a very strong traditional focus, which I believe a context which goes back thousands of years. And I'm not either willing to jettison that, because if you look at people like Steiner and that, he was very, very clear about the significance of Golgotha and that, and I affirm that. So it's interesting, the big clashes between one of the big badges of the movement that we oppose is Prometheanism. Now, I know a lot of people say, no, I'm Promethean and it's good. Now, of course, there's a good side and a bad side in everything. Same as the Catholic Church is a good side and a bad side. You can't throw everything out. But if we take the negative side of Prometheanism, it's an accurate description of an intense materialism, which is fundamental to Marx. It's fundamental to communism. Is fundamental to many of the revolutionary theories, fire in the mind in Europe at the time. It's fundamental to the Promethean project of space exploration. It's fundamental to all these philosophies. And of course, Benjamin Franklin was the modern Prometheus. He was the one that Kant said was the modern Prometheus. Frankenstein. This Prometheus is very, very important. And it gives you the clue. If we understand who the opponent is, the adversary, Prometheus is the front man in many senses, conceptually, for other spiritual movements. Prometheus is not a spiritual figure. This is a very important point to make. Prometheus has never appeared to anybody. He doesn't appear to people in dreams. There's no record of him appearing in apparitions or anything. He's not a real figure. He's a construct. And that's opposed to figures that are ontologically real. For example, in the Steinerian context, I believe too that I don't have any problem or doubt that the figure Jesus Christ exists and exists on the different levels. And similarly, a very, very interesting one is the figure of the Virgin Mary or the Virgin Sophia for Steiner. And we could perhaps come back to that. So she's actually a critical figure in the battle, from the perspective also of the Prometheans. So the Prometheus, of course, in relation to Franklin, describes his fascination with lightning and electricity. So electricity was electrical fire. This is critical to understand. So electricity is, and is described by them at the time, as electrical fire. So the electrical fire is testament to the success of the Promethean story in their view. So here we can touch the clouds, we can bring down the lightning, and we can control it. So you have these figures like Franklin, of course, who in his house in London, they discover all these, it was an anatomy school, they discover loads of fragments of bones that the police couldn't say that no crimes had been committed there hundreds of years afterwards. I'm not saying he did, but so he's interested in communications, the postal service, politics, anatomy, the brain, all these things. And what you see is that the people that were interested in electricity were fundamentally interested in physiology and biology. So once they could control the electricity, they began to apply it to the human body. So Franklin used to treat people for depression with electricity. John Wesley, the Protestant reformer, used to use electrical healing. Electricity became a critical aspect of the Promethean power. So that, of course, Promethean fire, electrical fire, later becomes, atomic fire, and also comes down to the nervous system. They talk about the nerves firing and the control. It's the same logic. So this is critical to understand that they believed, who is Prometheus, or what is the essential aspect of Prometheus? Prometheus basically says, I'm against the existing gods. So this is the critical relationship. Not happy with the position, and they're going to rebel against the gods. Not human, but claims that they're doing it for the humans. So they're superhuman in many senses, titanic. But it's the resistance against the gods that's the crucial thing. And all the legends really say You can't do that. So therefore, Prometheus is a placeholder for the older stories. Satan, Lucifer, fallen angel, all this story. Because we have in many cultures this idea that we have the creative force and then a split off that rejects it and is therefore in adversarial relationship. So Prometheanism, insofar as it represents this defiance of power through firepower, is the determining face of the materialist movement, which contrasts, if you like, the love of power with the power of love. This is what so associated with that is will, the significance of will, and the drive towards superhumanism. So what I suggest is that the Prometheanism is a likable figure for the ultra materialists that have no conception of the supernatural as any real thing, but only as a guiding policy connector between them, and that this Prometheanism brought them to electricity as a force of control. And very early on, Ampere was talking about cybernetic before they talked about cybernetics. So they knew, well, if we apply this to the body, as happened with Galvani, Aldini, and the basis of the story of Frankenstein, and they do all these experiments, and they appear to bring it back to life, well, then they say, this is life. Electricity is life. They confuse the power of electricity with the animation within the human body. And they find it difficult to identify what life is. But they say, well, therefore, we can be in the God, we can be the new gods. And so that philosophical matrix is a critical continuity right to the present time, which explains why you're going to have your electrical cars, why Elon Musk is in that pattern. Brain, electricity. That's what technocracy is. Technocracy in its classic form, described in the 1930s, is about control of the electrical grid. The idea will be that everything will be controlled by electricity and your use of electricity, including your right to exist. That you won't have any rights, but we will measure your inputs and outputs electrically, and therefore you can be managed by this system. Sorry, that was just an opening.
No, that was wonderful. And I think it's interesting that if you go into the older schematics as far as creative principles, once again, it begins with the fire element. These days, we can kind of pair that with the hydrogen waveform. But then that, of course, the solar energy, and at the same time being more the masculine or yang principle. And if you continue with the old school thinking, it drops down a couple more rungs into the water element, which we could most likely pair with the lunar or the feminine principle. Mm-hmm. So what you're describing there sounds like they bypassed all the other levels and just maintained one polarity, which is, in the old 7 ray principles, we're talking about the number 1 ray, the will force without anything tempering it. Exactly. Which would be, not just the feminine, but also the kind of the reason element at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that Mike is interested in the philosophical base that you talk about, atomism, and this is crucial. So we have this going. We see this in Maxwell, for example, when he's talking about electricity, and he's contrasting ideas of what's going on. And they contrast Democritus with Anaxagoras, and say, well, okay, they come to different conclusions. Which one is right? So the atomistic view is a critical driving force in all of this. And of course, that gives them power. And this is critical to understand. So from that atomistic view, we get all the things that lead up to the atomic bomb, obviously. It's very, very powerful. But it's also a very deconstructive force. It's a very left-brained force. It's a reductive force. And of course, at the higher end, the good physical theorists understand that once they go down to that level, that the world becomes different when you go into the quantum domain and that. But the key thing in all of this that people have to understand is all of these debates, we say there's all these different elements. They're about one thing. They're about governance. It's about governance. I say it again, it's about governance. So it's about global governance, and actually universal government, and they mean it in a broader sense. And that governance is going to be governance of every body, every human body, physiologically. So out of this system, out of the interest in nanotechnology, when we're talking about going down to 10 to the power of -9, and even into pico technology, as we're talking about, and into different levels, the idea is to get that. There's plenty of room at the bottom, as Feynman and talked about, to go into the nanotechnological domains, and therefore to reconstitute anything from there, including the human. So the objective of all this, of modern science, since science was defined in that scientistic way in the 1830s, distinguishing it from natural philosophy, that has all been about governance. Now, with the idea that you can break everything down and reconstitute it, they have come to the idea that they will reconstitute the human based on flawed theories. The idea that we're violent apes, which is an unscientific theory, it's disproven by science. Even people love Carl Sagan, but Carl Sagan's idea of the reptilian mind is disproved by scientists, for example. So there's an awful lot of these mythologies that have been used to bolster a reductive view of the human. And the atomistic view with nanotechnology gives them and tells us what the mechanism is. And this mechanism is justified or is evidenced in the literature in relation to the plans for AI and smart dust and these things. That it's clear that the brain-computer interface, the idea of one brain, one computer, and some massive operation ahead is a misleading distraction that Elon Musk put out. I think it was a deliberate distracting move to suggest that they're going to dig a big hole in your head. You're going to queue up, get a big hole in your head, and get something implanted. And it's not like that at all. It's clear from the literature that it's a brain-cloud interface, that it's intending to use nanotechnology to permeate the human body through a variety of neural dust so that it interacts with the electrical grid that they are building. That's quite clear. And even the scientists, there's one paper which has about 30 international scientists writing about this, and they say, it's schoolboy logic or philosophy behind it. This has to happen because the humans have to keep up with AI. They say, well, this is not nonsense. But this nonsense continues because most of science is about securing this totalitarian, scientocratic, technocratic control over everything. And it's not just of the human body, it's of nature as well. So the idea of smart dust, the idea of sensors everywhere is well, and we don't know how much sensors are out there. They use them, of course, secretly for military purposes. If we look at, we know that they're messing around with the stratosphere and they're injecting aerosols and stuff up there. We know that, claiming it's for climate change. But of course, it can also be for other purposes. With this small, again, if we think in terms of dust, this smart dust, it's intended to be everywhere, and it's intended to be in nature. In Ireland, 21% now of electrical consumption is for data centers. It's unbelievable. So 1/5 of all electricity is produced for the data centers. This is a massive consumption, which Lilly kind of anticipates in his idea of the solid state entity. But so what I'm suggesting is that we're entering a smart dust bowl, which has all the implications of the Dust Bowl in the United States in the 1930s. And that also will be a spiritual Dust Bowl. It will be where the center of what it is to be human disappears through this disintegration, this pulverization. It's even anticipated in I think, a negative way by Philip Pullman and his children's stories about this concept of dust, which he thinks is great in his literary approach. But I think it's a premonition or an indication of a future actual control of human consciousness by a left-brained, massive, pervasive system of dust. And so even in some of this stuff that's been sprayed around, we don't know to what extent that this is actually sensors as part of this turning the animating the earth by technological means, because they intend to create a total technosphere. There's not going to be nature in this system, which is why we want to appreciate nature. And when you say about the feminine figure, I think that's very, very interesting. I think it's correct. And this is why I don't know, a lot of people think this is old-fashioned or old hat or not relevant, but it's very, very relevant. That the figure that these Prometheans and that the Norman Atlanticist background that I identify with it, they're afraid of some of these old figures, and they're afraid of the Virgin Mary and some of these figures. Because they realize that they're actual figures, which is why there's so many apparitions in France. There's a symmetry there. But in 1900, Henry Adams, from the American political family, two presidents from he came to Europe, and he presented in his book, The Education of Henry Adams, in a chapter on the Virgin and the Dynamo, or the Dynamo and the Virgin. He said, what's happening now in 1900, when he visited one of the great exhibitions, is that the world is changing. It's moving, or Europe is changing. It's changing from a focus on the feminine beauty of the Virgin Mary, manifest in Chartres, the great cathedral, which Orson Welles says is the greatest piece of art in the world. Of course, everyone knows about the beauty of Chartres as a even artistic, cultural icon, apart from the religious context. And he said, we're moving from that to worship of the Dynamo. So the Dynamo and the Virgin was the opposition. And he said that, the Virgin is fading away. Now, what he's expressing there is also a policy decision, I believe, or he's reflecting a deeper policy. There is a policy to remove this figure, which was crucial in Europe, at least, and in Mexico. Look at California, the presence of the Virgin Mary, actually very, very, very strong. But this figure is being removed, and has been a constant effort to remove. And if you look at all the language associated with this new simulacrum, the matrix, what is a matrix? The matrix is the womb. What is the most famous womb in the history of mankind? Hail Mary, full of grace, blessed the womb. The matrix is the simulacrum of this, of the Virgin Mary in this context. And the actual effort, which is in the feminist literature now, to create equality in the future between men and women by having ectogenesis, by having what Huxley said, by having babies born outside the womb, is a deliberate juxtaposition against this idea of the matrix. And even when we come down to symbolism and McDonald's M, you see when you're going across Europe, you see this M out in the fields everywhere from McDonald's, 50 kilometers, 70 kilometers away. It's that M, just the double arches. Now, this M appears in the Virgin Mary iconography in the miraculous medal in 1830, which in the famous instructions in the apparition to construct an image, the images of the Virgin Mary on a globe and a snake and a M, which looks like an MTV, which I don't think is accidental, and the M is critical. So everywhere that the symbols of this new order seek to create a simulacrum. And I talked about this with my friend San Chin on his talking a Taoist priest, did a talk with him, and I said that you can see this fascination with Marian images. And I said this before last week, and I was saying, for example, the concept of something being immaculate. And then last week, afterwards, we have this revelation of the supposed secret programs on UFOs called the Immaculate Constellation, which already Schellenberg are calling the Immaculate Conception. This is not accidental. There is a deliberate attempt to remove this And the reversal is to go back to the pre-Christian era, to go back to the pre-Jewish era in Babylon, to move back to the Garden of Eden scenario, and that Marian opposition is right throughout. It's absolutely consistent. So when Henry Adams is saying it's the Virgin versus electrical power, it was exactly right. It was a much deeper analysis than people might think. It wasn't accidental. It was referring to two worldviews which were utterly different. And of course, they know that in a Christian and Catholic tradition, going back to Genesis, that the triumph over the snake is, they believe, the Virgin Mary. Now, what is the snake? This is an interesting thing. If we look at the snake, of course, there's many very positive ideas of the serpent. There's a book, The Good and the Bad Serpent, and I think 40 positive things and 16 different cultural associations. So we have to think about what the serpent is. It's not just a little talk and temptation thing. It's a much deeper thing, and especially if it's intended to be about the future. I believe that the snake indicates a number of values associated with this kind of new world, particularly stealth, which is important, particularly the changing skin, the new world order, and that. But also, it indicates the cable, it indicates the cord, it indicates these coils. And when A.B. Warburg, who was behind the Warburg Institute, which is the great center for study of magic in Britain, he was in an asylum in Switzerland, and to get out of the asylum, he had to do a lecture. They would be convinced he was okay if he could give a lecture. And he had been to Arizona, so he had prepared a lecture on the snake in Hopi culture, and he got out of course, and was a very influential thinker. But what he says at the end of that lecture was that the snake power, which is associated in a number of cultures with lightning, again going back to the Promethean context, this is the snake. The snake power is now manifested in the coils of Edison's electricity, of course, who was another Promethean figure. So he recognized that there was a deeper symbolism. So in many senses, what I suggest is that we have to really focus. We have to focus on a number of things. One, that we're facing global governance, and your countries, they don't really exist in the way that you think they do now. There isn't homogenous entities left, and they have been actively destroying them. That you're ruled by places like London still, but Switzerland and Geneva is critical in all of this, in certain places. And of course, China is going to have more control over you. So global governance is the single agenda. All these philosophical arguments, etc., are irrelevant. Everything in relation to artificial intelligence, all of that is irrelevant to this goal, that the governance will be physiologically and total, and it will be of your body and of the environment and of the natural world. And that is based on the electrical system and based on control of your nervous system. So we talk about the Huxleys, and we know about Julian Huxley, and we forget about the Huxley that won the Nobel Prize for studying the nervous system in 1963. And he studied the axon in the giant squid. And why are they studying these things? They're studying them because the authorities, the corporate powers, the powers behind the corporate powers, want to be able to totally control your nervous system. So the idea in cybernetics, as expressed by Deutsch, the nerves of government, was to set up, indicating that they would take the idea of the body and project it onto the world as the governance system, and govern the global system as the body kind of works, and also incorporate the human into that nervous system. So they've been focusing on the nerves, and particularly when they understood that they could control the nervous system with electricity, well, then the model for governance in the future, including a whole theological view that they would become the new gods, that they would create an actual god with artificial intelligence, as they're telling us now. So yeah, we have to focus on governance. We have to focus on that's what the objective is. And all of these other things going on, they all move towards that. Their technique is to spread as much smart dust, as much neural dust, as much things that can control us around the world to make it pervasive. And then it will be very, very difficult to oppose it. And the technologies are there, and they've been developed by various people. Phil Kennedy was an Irish guy that inserted things in his brain. There's plenty of examples. The chap Charles Lieber that was working in Wuhan, the only person from America prosecuted in this context, he's an expert in these nanowires in the brain. So carbon nano tubes, graphene, all of this stuff is all associated with being able to see what's happening in the human body and being then able to condition and control it. And that's what the objective is. The objective,
James, is the objective? I'm just curious. Do you think it's a smokescreen that the transhumanistic, slant on this is a Nietzschean Uberman directive, or is that all just smoke and mirrors for just pure control? And they have no actual intention for trying to create the Superman. They're in fact just their entire focus is almost like as just this very cynical need to control all for what though in the end. And I think this is where we're gonna move into nature of evil as well. But is there a directive there for creating this Superman, or is it really just all about control?
Well, there will have to be an elite class, and the elite class will be the superhuman class. So if you look at, people forget there's a lot of the most ignored political movement in the world is Trotskyism, for example. It's just one that people have missed for some reason. Whereas the Trotskyists are the most active, most intelligent, most hardworking of all the political cleverest of all the actors. There's a book written by an expert, and he talked about during the time of Thatcher, there was 20,000 active Trotskyists. Now, these are people that needed permission from the party to do anything, to go on holidays, whatever. It's quite incredible in Britain. But they had no democratic representation, because that's not what the area they were fighting in. But if you look at Trotsky, he wrote about it in the 20s, 100 years ago, and explained that we were moving towards superhumanism. So underlying his vision was this superhuman vision, this transhumanist vision as well. So by all the different accounts, whether you're a billionaire or they're coming to this agenda. But this superhumanism is only for the elite, because they need this class, one, to validate their power and for the power they will control. They have said that they want to do experiments on them. This is what Bernal said, The World, the Flesh and the Devil, 1929, that the people that won't change will be experimented upon in the human zoo. So, and they also want people to admire them. That will be part of the process. So one feature which shouldn't be ignored, associated with this mentality, is the dark side of curiosity. So curiosity is a fantastic thing that we want to encourage, but it's fantastic when it's linked to positive values. But there's also a thing called morbid curiosity, which you find in psychopaths and all the people. You say, well, why are they doing that? And it's morbid. It's a dark curiosity. Now, if you look at Bernal, the only value that he apart from securing power, which he said that scientists would secure power by stealth through scientific corporations, and the only value that he's espousing after that, after the total control, is curiosity on its own. So this is morbid curiosity. So this is the type of thing that says, well, what would happen if we, put someone up and, except a weird kind of mad scientist thing. And we see this in bits. If you look at the work of Henry Cotton in the United States, for example, the mad scientist, who did loads of operations and horrible operations on people. You know, they used to, of course, do brain operations. People that weren't doctors sticking things up in here so they could put various things in the brain. This is not a long time ago in America. So these morbid curiosities where, well, what happens if we do this? What happens? And there's loads of examples of people dying in the chair by scientists in the United States experimenting on people when they had a hole in their skull, or, for example. So that morbid curiosity is associated with a type of sadism. It's not necessarily sadism, but it goes together. Unfortunately, in my prediction of a totalitarian regime run by these people, they would be sadistic. They would be of a different nature, not just your ordinary, decent tyrant that will kill hundreds of millions, but an extra element to it. I'm saying that jokingly. We may encounter something that we have never seen in not just a scientific, like in scientific socialism in the Soviet Union to wipe out people, but a deeply ingrained sadism in that. And that's anticipated by the fact that the Marquis de Sade was a champion of reason. And he informed people like George Bataille, who is a key person behind the postmodernist movement. And this leads to an idea of sacrifice being a human sacrifice. Sorry for going on so long. So yes, it's for them. The space travel is for them. So when I hear Alex Jones saying, "Oh, we need a space," and Eric Weinstein, "We need a space travel," this is for the elite, not for you, for your benefit. So the same as they will use the ordinary people to build up America, send them off to wars, and then they will destroy them. The same as they would use the Irish as a colony, send them off to fight in all the battles, Battle of Waterloo, Peninsular Wars, etc., and then destroy it. The same as they destroy their own people in Britain. This superhuman thing is for them. Immortality is for them. Anything that will be able to do. Of course, maybe our organs will be useful for them if they need to prolong their life, etc. This is already happening in China. So, yes, that's there, but that's for them.
So what happens to them when they're so solely focused on what you're talking about? And, ominous indeed when you consider all that is in place right now, including ubiquitous smart dust and everything else, and a lot of things we don't even know about. But I think we can take solace in the fact that we're looking at a bifurcation in a population where you see some people doing better than ever, actually just memeing, all that we're talking about and kind of having fun with it. And whereas on the other side that seems to be more prone to indoctrination, they're suffering not only the consequences of cutting themselves off from source, but their bodies are failing, their finances are failing, and everything else. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is there seems to be some other force in the universe that some people are tapped into that are not only protecting them, but helping them thrive in the midst of all that we're talking about. So I think, that's what we need to bottle and really understand more. And the fact is we don't need anybody else other than our own apparatus to place our attention on regeneration and all the things we want to see in the world. And it seems like maybe since they've gone so far down one single road that they've actually lost their tether and actually need us for their batteries. So it doesn't seem like they're in a winning position at all.
Yes and no. I wouldn't underestimate it. I think there's the length of this thing. It could be a long time. I think there's a long battle going on, and it also involves the spiritual domain. So there is some kind of deep, and these people are calling on. They want you not to believe in things that people have believed. Say Jesus, for example. They want you to renounce them. They're quite clear on that. Because they fear them. They do fear those things, because people forget about, in the Christian story, how the power over demons was a crucial aspect of the ministry. and how identification with that power is critical. And that's why in Steiner as well, when you see the Archangel Michael being a critical figure, that's a long tradition. So these figures are there. The implication is that this battle permeates the different levels and is ongoing, and particularly came pronounced in the latter part of the 19th century. Dostoevsky saw that as well, and they anticipated what was happening. And if you, a key concept which helps understand, I think, what the concept of evil and that is about, forces us to go to the other side and say, well, what is it that it's not? And the key, if we go back to the mythology or the perennial tradition, we see that the enlightened ones are telling us that we're compassionate beings, that we're full of love, that the Creator is loving, and that's what we have to recognize. We have to really believe in that. And associated with that is the notion of care. Now, in the Roman legends, as opposed to Promethean legends, in the Roman legends, it's care who gives the essence who creates the human out of the dust. And this is another about dust. The dust is what everyone is formed from in all the traditions, where the human is formed from dust, which is why this dust is so important in the future. It's an effort at a new genesis, a new world, a new creation. So if we go back, but we weren't just dust. The spirit was put into us. This is in all the stories. There was this light coming into us. Or in the Roman legend, it was cura, it was care. So care was the one who gave us our existence. So the function of care is important. Now, every positive thing that you do is based on taking care, on being care. When you're doing your scientific explorations, or where you're looking after your family, or you're looking after your garden, or you're looking out in the sea, care is a critical thing. And care is very, very powerful. If we look at the Christian anarchists, or we look at Kropotkin or the anarchists, it was this, they're saying, well, it's not all about competition. Cooperation is important, and cooperation is an important aspect. And in the people like Martin Novak, in the context of a critique of existing evolutionary theory, explains that in an evolutionary context, cooperation has been ignored in relation to human development. So if we conceive that this, what the perennial philosophy is telling us is that we are care, and that the spiritual leaders are saying, you are light, you are love, God is, you go back to that, you maintain that, you expand it, and you apply those things outward. All of the negative things, whether you look at the various psychological dark triads or Machiavellianism, or it's a bit hard on Machiavelli, because Machiavelli, for example, said that you couldn't have a society run without God in it. Whatever, how bad it, no matter he was the model, the blueprint for the mafia, even the mafia understand you need rules and you need an authority. But Machiavelli said you cannot have a society without God. So it's a bit unfair to some of the statements attributed to him. But Machiavellianism, sadism in particular, what are they about? They're about the absence of care. They're about not caring what happens, not having feelings, not having empathy, not having the ability to understand the consequence of your actions. In the near-death experience, when people report and they go and they have the life review, what they're doing is experience the consequence of a lack of care often, in the negative sense, when they haven't, So what those stories are telling us is that this is your nature. It's hard to believe, but this is what your nature is. And if we look at any animal, how they care for their young, no matter how violent they are or whatever, they do things in ways which care for others, and that balances out in some way in natural environments. The new system seeks to replace care with technology. So a zero trust society, abolish trust. You can't trust a person, you're dependent on the technology, for example, or only technology. So they take out the human values, or the human values of communication, interpersonal contact, intimacy, for example. So they take intimacy, and we're made to confuse intimacy, say with pornography, and to forget that humans need basic intimacy, basic contact. This is how we're built. So of course they turn it into something else, and they can control it. In all of those things, we end up with a lack of care. And if you look at people like Kate Harrington, who talks about the contraceptive pill as being an example of transhumanism as a feminist, she says that in feminism there was two conflicting theories. One was an idea of the female aspect of care and focus on care, and the other one was focusing on freedom. Now, this is a key concept in relation to what evil is. We have two concepts of freedom. In relation to freedom in its traditional natural law sense, in nearly all traditions, that for you to exercise your freedom, you have to recognize other people, and you have to recognize limitation. You have to recognize that you have to stop yourself doing things. You have to restrain yourself. You have to control yourself. And this is a thing, of course, that Nietzsche and those thought was a very, they didn't like that. They didn't like that restraint. So, your freedom is circumscribed by your respect for others. This is why every system comes up with rules. Why Hammurabi, the first code of laws, he gets them from the God and comes, and why the principle from God and comes and tells we need certain rules. And people say, well, I don't believe in all this dogma. You know what I mean? Which bit do you not? Please tell me which bit do you not believe in? Thou shalt not kill. Is that a problem for you? Tell us about, so I know. Thou shalt not steal. Just tell us, is this the things that you're not willing to abide by? And to look at an example of that, if you look at the descriptions of people who went through the OSS training in America, now these were all facilitated by the Brits. The Brits regarded the Americans as very naive. They always regarded them as very innocent, and they were, of course, compared with their long history. They didn't have the dark cynicism that the empire had created going back hundreds of years, of the bloodthirsty thing. So another thing that people forget is that after Pearl Harbor, Winston Churchill lived in the White House for 3 weeks, and from there, the future plan of the world was made. And by 1943, he was saying the next empire is the empire of the mind. They told you what was going to happen. So he said it wasn't it's portrayed as the Brits begging the Americans. That was not the way it happened. Most of the traffic was the other way around, as it was in Bletchley Park, etc. But a number of the guys that went through these processes says we were trained to do the opposite of the 10 Commandments. Of course, you understand it. In espionage, you're trained to kill, you're trained to steal, you're trained to do everything the opposite. The problem is when you don't dismantle those systems from a particular context, and that expands into a philosophy that operates the whole state, as happened in Italy with Propaganda Due, for example, a whole secret infrastructure, Masonic, etc., running the state behind the scenes. That when you get into that and you say, oh, well, there's a good reason why we're killing these people, then you get into a dark aspect. And of course, another thing that people don't understand is once you get into a corporate body, things seem different because you feel distant from the pain you might inflict, and people are removed from the immediacy of interaction, of the consequence of their action. So they can do worse things in a corporate context, which is why a lot of these secret societies are so dangerous, because people don't understand what's happening in their name. Sorry if I'm going on there too long.
In this idea, well, it's so funny. I was just going to say, the care, yes, very important. But of course, the woke culture, the critical race theory, all that is wrapped around care, into care, right? Supposedly, right? What's their whole thing about equity, inclusion, diversity? Meanwhile, they are totally justifying the machine that's crushing the human soul in this weird, it's a total inversion, of course, right? Of care.
Yeah, but it's the simulacrum, because, for example, so Jesus used the central story is the Good Samaritan. All the people, all the goody two shoes passing by, but the Good Samaritan, who's not meant to help this guy who's beaten on the ground, helps them, and that's the example. It's very immediate. It's very, very interpersonal. This is what the essence of the story is about. It's not distant. It's not sending your money to someone that lives on the other side of the planet. So what organizations do is create a great distance between the instinct of care and its exercise, so it can be corrupted with intermediate steps. But the woke idea of the Good Samaritan story would be like the famous cartoon, which is an equivalent, an analogy. So the Good Samaritan would come along and say, seeing the person lying on the ground, oh, the person that did this, the perpetrator, needs my help. So it would be an inversion. So that's right. Care is inverted. And it's deliberately
Well, it reminds me of
inverted.
just the statement, James, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Well,
Right?
that's right. And also, it is an inversion of care. So it has been co-opted. It's been co-opted through deliberate constructions of NGOs, which have been a weapon, particularly after the Second World War. It came from that British, American Atlanticist idea as well. Use all these organizations. And if you look at even CARE was the name of the legislation in the United States.
The CARE Act.
Yeah, in relation to coronavirus, all that kind of stuff. CARE organization is used for a whole range of different, I won't go into all that. So when they say they're doing CARE, there's usually an inversion. And all of those inversions involve something which means that you're not exercising care directly to anybody, to a system, to a plant, to a person, whatever. It's distancing and it's taking control. So we're moving towards hypertech care and hypotech care, which I call. So hypotech care coming under your skin. They're coming under your skin, as Yuval Noah Harari is telling you. They're going to penetrate your body. They're straight up telling you that they're going to do so. And this is the care you're going to get. The care is another word for control. An interesting thing about that point before I move on, when you're talking about the care thing, and you mentioned, and you were talking about and discussing this idea of non-duality. And I was discussing this with someone in the Aurobindo community in India. And I was saying, well, why are you talking about non-duality? And this was what was going through my head. Because the tradition is of Advaita in Indian. It's not non-duality. Non-duality is a concept, as far as I can see, that grew up from just after the year about 2000. A Western use, a Western reflect. It's not referring, it's a Western concept. And non-duality, if you look at a graph of the use of the word, non-dual, very, very popular, it directly parallels the use of the word transgender. Non-dual, what does that say? And it directly parallels transgenderism. A couple of years later, non-binary. So when you were small, you never heard these concepts. Neither of you. When you never heard it, they didn't exist. There wasn't such thing. Non-binary came. It maps on, it correlates with transhumanism. And when you look where they came from, they didn't really come from anywhere. So what I would suggest is that the non-dual thing that seems great. Now, I'm not criticizing the people that I understand what it means. I understand what Advaita Vedanta is. I'm very disposed towards it. But I also believe that a lot of these things come from the military-industrial complex. And when you end up saying, well, actually, Mike, you don't exist, you're just consciousness and there's no, it's easy for me to take away your rights then. They don't like the Christian notion, for example. When you talk about the Magna Carta couldn't have come into being without the church. If you look at Archbishop Stephen Langton, etc., and all this kind of stuff. And we have a very interesting, if we go back to the time of Thomas Becket, a very interesting time, because there we see the conflict. Thomas Becket, who was the friend of Henry II, and he appoints him as Lord Chancellor, and then he appoints him as Archbishop of Canterbury. And then he begins to defend the church against royalty. He wasn't meant to do that. He wasn't Anglo-Saxon, as in the famous film about him. He was from a Norman background. So he opposes this and says, no, you're the state and you're royalty, and this is our territory. And interestingly, after he's killed by Henry II's men, who will help me get rid of this meddlesome priest, he begins to reappear to many people. And he begins to reappear to many people after Henry II goes to Ireland. They'd invaded in 1169. And the ghost the spirit is saying, you shouldn't be doing this. Because I was always wondering, why were Catholics invading a Catholic nation that had been the island of saints and scholars? So it was already in the church, this division that later came out in the Reformation. It was this simulacrum within it already, but they were the good guys. So Thomas Becket, his ghost was appearing to, and William of Canterbury writes about this. So these conflicts are there all the time, but it's an interesting example of this supernatural intervention, which is why you get this, you get this thing in a lot of Shakespearean plays about Hamlet or Macbeth. They know that they cannot escape this reality, this spiritual reality, because it will come back and haunt them. And this is what's going to happen. This is to go back to the positive side and their weakness. The weakness will be their exposure to this supernatural karmic force, to what Judas Samuel Huntington said, that the thing that he noticed about the Davos men at that time when he was writing was that they had no souls. That's how he described it. There was no soul. They didn't love the country, didn't love anything. But there will be this. There will be different categories. There are the Judas group that have kissed the face of Christ and that have betrayed humanity, and some of them will realize it, and they will be in the field of blood of their own accord. That's what the karmic message of it. They will punish themselves. A lot of theories about hell say that the people go of their own accord. They have done the things. They know that the things that they have done are wrong. It's not as if there's someone sending them. They are like binding with like. But the problem is when you've been living an evil thing and your birds of a feather are flocking together, you're with other people who are of the same, and that's not nice, because you won't be getting any of the good values. So the spiritual traditions say there is some continuity, whether you're in a number of the traditions. What you do here, your good continues, and the evil continues. And the reality of that they have been trying to avoid this idea that there is any karmic reality, that there is any consequences. And even I listened to an Irish artist talking about his reinterpretation of Dante's Inferno, and he was trying to make take the sting out of it. Saying, okay, that's fine, but really, the 9th level of hell will be for the people that betrayed their own, the Judas figures. Dante's instincts were correct. Now, it doesn't have to be in the exact same construction, but we put ourselves into the positions ourselves. There are many people that experience hell on earth of their own actions, and that we can't believe that this will be reflected in some way. There's no consequence. So that's the real thing. That if people begin to assert the reality of this karmic reality that people used to believe in, C.S. Lewis talked about the discarded image. There used to be a holistic view of the universe and how things work, and that was kind of sidelined. So people believe there's no consequence to their actions, especially when they actually get away with it in the real world. And they've been convinced that there's nothing else afterwards. But the reality of that supernatural force, if you see it in its positive sense, there is a dark sense of the moving away from the light as well, the moving away from people, the moving away from the light as manifested in people and of nature. So there is a way that we have to accept that that's real, and also that it's not up to us to redesign the whole world in some material form, and we're never going to achieve this heaven by a material route, which is behind the false image of that you suggested, Mike.
It does appear that they give some credence to some karmic backlash, though, if you consider that the controllers in their system of jurisprudence and just basic disclosure about things they're doing. They always tell us in some way what they're doing, even if it's obscure somewhat or a place where they know most people won't find that information. And also within our legal system, as you're well aware, they always get our consent as an end around to the, the karma they might suffer by overriding our free will. So we're talking about atomism, and it sounds like these folks are just into a complete materialism, but it sounds like they really do have spiritual underpinnings on some level, and that is just part of their indoctrination and control. So maybe also with, and I'm just throwing a lot of stuff out here, maybe we could contrast between Satanism and Luciferianism, and how that might may have been developed through Prometheanism. So if you could maybe delineate that sort of thing, and are these folks in control? Who I've actually been able to mingle with a few of these old families in my own experience. They do believe that they somehow have some kind of spiritual prerogative to do all the things that they're doing and justify it through through a spiritual context. So,
yeah, a key concept is the concept of possession. So what I'm arguing is that this new, and there is, some people have written about neuroliberalism as a description of this process, which I articulate with different concepts. But behind this is an idea to possess the human consciousness. It is a mirror of spiritual possession. And people say, well, they won't be able to do that. They won't be able to control your spirit. They will be able to stop you. They will be able to, as Steiner accurately anticipated. So I don't believe they cannot do it. They can stop you being a spiritual being. I believe that that's possible. And you talk about the old families. Now, if you look at someone like Father Malachi Martin, who wrote a very good book on, he wrote a book, this book about globalism is about the keys of the blood, about John Paul II and that. Malachi Martin was very good on understanding globalism and identifying. Now, he had a lot of insights about what was happening, but he said that a lot of possession occurred in the New England families, in the old families, in the rich families, in the East Coast, North America, the families that were there for a long time. He believed there was a lot of possession, and he also talked about a concept which is kind of ignored. He talked about perfect possession. So perfect possession is where a person is not possessed by a being that makes them feel uncomfortable. This possession is total and it helps them, and they feel good about it. So they don't appear to be struggling against this. They're so perfectly possessed by this entity that it doesn't appear to be bad to them. And he believed that was endemic in some of these old families in America, particularly on the East Coast, so that you wouldn't have any idea that they were necessarily possessed. But you certainly see that there's a fascination with blood. It's in all the literature. It's incontrovertible that the royal families have some strange preoccupation with blood, a mystical, if you like. So, in many senses, what's happening with this, what I believe is happening is that we are going to be possessed. That the objective is to possess us and bring us to the underworld. So when you're talking about
a technological possession.
Yes, but it will become a spiritual possession. It cannot not be. Now, on an individual level, in a short space of time, that won't happen. But in relation to humanity in general, its intention is to bring us to the underworld. And they talk about this in relation to, even in some of the psychedelics, some of the scientific researchers say specifically that when they're talking about the mechanical elves, they believe that the mechanical elves are possessing your consciousness. And what they're doing in London and in the Caribbean is expanding this thing so they can be possessed longer. Now, I don't recommend, I'm against that. I don't want to be possessed by little guys. But so the idea is that in the underworld, there are these figures that we can connect with and be possessed by it, be controlled. So it's a literal moving into the underworld. And they're quite open about that. And this is often from people who are materialists, but because this involves a material substance, they believe that it's some way okay, because the non-spiritual person, particularly brought up with this kind of Atlanticist viewpoint, is willing to contemplate and countenance something spiritual which is based on a material input, and then therefore they accept it. And another funny thing associated with a lot of this is, and this is a problem I have with a lot of kind of New Age endeavors, is that they're talking about you having a correspondence with the lower astral planes. All the things they're talking about are at the lower end of the thing, which traditionally the mystics avoid all those things. They're not interested in that. They don't want to be involved in that. It's not their domain. There's a whole range of fallen creatures, different creatures, and they don't want to be in with this. So we have a fluidity between these zones, and in many senses, I think the lower astral is manifesting itself on this plane because there are so many people that are want to embody and incarnate these things, and this is part of the wider spiritual battle. That's why I think also that we shouldn't allow the concept of God be given to the people that don't know how to deal with it, or to take it to themselves, and that the expansive concept of God, we shouldn't relinquish that, and we shouldn't relinquish our commitment to what that means in whatever way we conceive that, without, whatever way that the idea of and a conscious force which is there. It doesn't mean that this conscious force has to necessarily, for example, a New Age argument that I hear a lot is, well, how would the world be so bad if there was a God? Surely the God would intervene. No, it doesn't work that way. In a free will universe, that makes no sense to me. How could that work? It doesn't. The problems are created. Most of the problems are created by humans, and they're associated with our mistakes, errors, badness, whatever like that. And of course, we have the study of ponerology, which was Christian in many senses, but then became associated with politics. Lobachowski writes about political ponerology and pathocracy, the idea that evil can be institutionalized. Now they're saying, and some of the English guys are saying, "Oh, this is what you have in America." I don't believe that. And there's the party political stuff. He was talking about in Krakow, first seeing the Nazis and then seeing the Soviets, and seeing the type of people that were brought in. And we're seeing all these apparatchiks in our own lives around us, all these people who have no talent, no values, no commitment, except to their own fitting into the system and their own grandiosity. And this is the great evil that Hannah Arendt talked about in the bureaucratization of evil. So, of course, it's easier to commit evil if you're distant from it, if it's a machine, if it's writing a piece of paper. And this is people really have to resist that as well. So the possession. So then we come to the satanic and the Luciferian thing. I don't have to make the argument, for example, that Satanism exists and Lucifer, because the Luciferians and Satanists tell you that. Now, the exact nature of Satan and Lucifer, of course, there's a huge debate, and there is a very strong movement which says, "Oh, well, Lucifer's a good guy," and I understand that. I understand the argument. If you look at the other side, there is an argument that Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub are manifestations of the same force, the same adversarial force, and you can put into that the different aspects. If we go back to the Babylonian and the Middle East, but many of the people that are articulating these views in Satanism, they are telling us that they exist, that they are real forces. And certainly in the Christian, Judeo-Christian tradition, Islamic tradition, many of them, they know that these beings exist, the entities exist. And then you have Charles Upton's argument about that a lot of these ETs are, part of the demonic realm as well. They're not actually from some planet out there. They're beings which are here. And there are certainly beings on this planet that can move into your energy system. Now, what they are exactly, I don't know, but some of the grave figures, I believe, can move into your. They're not fellows coming down in a flying saucer, they are entities around us that can move energetically into us. So there's clearly a hierarchy.
James, were you the one? Sorry, were you the one saying that even Genghis Khan, that his entire motivation for devastating the world population was to destroy the jinn? Did I hear that from you? I heard that recently from somebody.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I didn't say that. I didn't.
To destroy the what?
So the entire motivation was to destroy the jinn, basically the demons who had taken over humanity. And there's a lot of historic precedents. I was going down the rabbit holes on that recently. It must have been someone else similar to your stance there, and I thought that was quite fascinating. You know, he supposedly like killed a third of the world or something.
Yeah, but you don't have to work hard or to find that there are people that believe in these things. There are people with evil intention. There are people, you know, I see there's abortion clinics open in the US, you know, with satanic rituals openly.
Well, we see it in pop culture everywhere right now too. It's like they have like all the hip hop music and stuff is like demons and really dark, and then this infatuation in Hollywood disclosure right now in the quote unquote freedom awake circles about, you know, with Diddy and all this satanic ritual stuff. Is this all coming to light for a reason, or is this just more of them projecting their sorcery so that because they see that we're so captivated by it that falling into the culture there, it makes us more susceptible to possession?
Yes, and what is frightening is when I looked at, and I was studying some of these figures, and you see how they're being presented to young people. You know, the young people are engaged, and it really is shocking. And I call me old-fashioned, but they're being presented in their recreation with how to contact some of the, you know, the nastiest demons, and they're saying, "Whoa, wow!" I couldn't believe what's going on. So certainly there is a massive attempt to incorporate and to bring into a big movement, a real movement, because what I was going to say about the Virgin Mary aspect is we're coming to the end of Christianity in the form that it existed. It doesn't mean that it's gone away, but it could be that Catholicism goes underground, for example, in a lot of places, back to the catacombs again. The persecution is coming. There's a couple of things to say about that there is a lot of prophecies of this in the Catholic tradition. There is one interesting one that, apropos, perhaps your work with plants, in the 1880s, associated with the Virgin Mary, and Marie Jehannet in Brittany, who was a great seer, and she describes that Europe being taken over by Islam and a war going on, and it sounds very plausible, but this was, you know, quite a while ago. And they described a massive plague that will come, and this plague will be associated with 7 days in the body and burning, that the face will appear as it was burning. But what's interesting about that was that the Virgin Mary said, she gave a cure in that. She said that no medical potion will be able to deal with this, but there will be one cure, which I believe is white hawthorn, the leaves of hawthorn, a decoction from hawthorn. So that's quite interesting. There may be an upsurge in demand for hawthorn.
That's also interesting, since hawthorn is, recognized as the best single herb for heart function. So maybe it's about finding our heart again. I question if I don't know, but I do question if there's actual individualized entities, of evil intent, or if they're our own creation. And the work that I did, which was very medical, neurological based, it wasn't woo-woo stuff, but we did have to address when treating people, things that we called entities, and those entities were self-created. For an example, two different classifications. The old, I think the German term was doppelganger, which would be like voodoo, where somebody is projecting energy onto somebody else, and then, or an obsession, where we gather the momentum within ourselves through our obsessive focus. But the point is the human consciousness has the ability to concentrate energy to the point where it becomes a living entity. And I saw some spectacular things when I was treating people. One time in our research center, where we were with very grounded, brilliant doctor types, very science backgrounds and all that kind of thing. We actually witnessed a person levitating off a table and, then flopped down on the ground once we, did certain things, not an exorcism or anything, but by treating the body to dissipate that energy field so it no longer had control of the faculties of that individual. So I think a lot of this is self-created, and that's the biggest secret that's being kept from us, is that we have the ability to do some pretty fantastical things, including sabotage ourselves.
Yeah, and well, of course, there's all the Jungian notion of autonomous complexes from the dark side. But I think there's a danger that they ignore the actual ontological reality of stuff out there. And this is what a lot of people don't believe, that there is actually stuff out there that can that can interfere with us. And one question, again, if you take the Prometheus example, if all this stuff is correct and there's so much focus and so much energy, where is he? Where is this, even the egregore? Where is the thing out there? It doesn't seem to exist in any real sense, you know what I mean? Whereas, and then the other interesting aspect of it is that people say, well, I don't see, I can go into this realm and I don't see Jesus or the Virgin Mary. You're not going to see, the Chinese people if you've gone to India in the same, you're going to different places, which is another interesting thing. The conception of what it is that we're dealing with, which is difficult. The discarded image that C.S. Lewis was talking about. But I don't have any problem. For me, I'm certain. For example, I can't really prove that you two guys exist in reality. Unfortunately, I hadn't had the luck to meet you in person. So in 5 years' time, it may be impossible for me to know that there is a real person at the other end. Well, less than that, the thing. So do I think you exist? Yes, I do think you exist. But I mean, I have the same questions in relation to entities out there. And there's certain entities that I've seen in different contexts that, it's difficult. You have to exercise discernment. But do I believe that those entities exist? Yes. Do I believe the Virgin Mary exists? Absolutely, 100%. I don't have any doubt about it. It's not a construction in my head. Of course, I know that won't satisfy anyone. But I'm telling you two people as friends in this context, yeah, I do believe that this is a real force. And also in relation to the study, for example, of the apparitions, there's a remarkable body of literature that explained what was happening in relation to the world, explained from the 1800s that there was this force, a demonic materialist force that was manifesting and that was indicating whether it was communism or later aspects of capitalism, which was an intense materialism, which was attempting to take over religious worship, etc., which it has been quite successful at doing. And a remarkable symbology in the whole range of apparitions. And when I looked
James, you also have the tradition of the Catholic exorcists. You can't deny, right, that those were physical, real experiences they had that were unexplainable as well.
If you talk to any of these people that know what they're talking about, it's very difficult to believe that they are creating these things. I mean, some of them are very affected by the experiences. I don't have any problem with that, and I don't have any problem when I'm looking at some of the people I'm seeing in the world at the moment. That we're seeing different type of people. I don't think it's just because I'm getting old, but there's different types of people out there now, and there's also a loss of a certain type of person. The in our Catholics were persecuted for hundreds of years in Ireland, and again for nearly a millennium. We take it, and we include the Vikings, and that's certainly a millennium. But and they were persecuted before that. But if you're talking about, I'm going to see shortly one of my aunts who's in her 90s, and she'd be that kind of old Catholic. Now these were not, they weren't dogmatic. They weren't interested in all these kind of rules. They were interested in a deep belief, which was informed by ideas of the Holy Spirit. Because there's a book out on Christian atheism by Zizek. Now, this is another part. He says it openly. They're trying to undermine Christianity by being involved in it. So, but I'm not letting some of these things go. In fact, it's making me defend some of the things a bit more rigorously. But my aunt as well is she talks about talking to the stones and talking to the land in a way which is totally pre-Christian. There was no inconsistency. We have the idea that you have to be one thing or be another, instead of taking the best of the things and bringing them together. And she talks in a way that is not of the same world. It goes back to, in my belief, to the ancient world. It goes back to the time before the ancient Greeks that survived in Ireland. It's dying now. It's really, really disappearing now, because the intention has been to break any ancient cultures. And I think they're nearly there with that. I think they've nearly achieved the mission in Ireland, unfortunately. There's a really deep attack on the reality of that spiritual tradition. But there's very, very powerful beliefs, and these people that have these simple beliefs in the reality of the universe, the wonder of the universe, the wonder of life itself, the amazing experience we have, that shouldn't be reduced or shouldn't be put down in its inherent beauty. They are able to extract from spirituality a great power for themselves in their lives. And when they can exemplify that to others, it becomes very, very powerful. And that's the kind of humbleness. You either find some spiritual humility, or you're going to encounter humiliation. Humiliation is what this system seeks to do to people. But if you have encountered a spiritual humility, as in the Taoist concept, then you're not going to be humiliated, and the system will not be able to humiliate you. And that's where the great wisdom in the Chinese tradition comes from, that by adopting the soft approach, adopting the low approach, then that you have greater power. You have secured the ground and the foundation better than the person who seeks to exert the yang power. That won't survive. So I think there's a lot that system was also ingrained in the Irish tradition. I think it was there, that the soft power, the belief, which is non-intellectual, which is linked to nature, which is linked to joy, which is linked, and you emphasize this, Mike, as well. I've heard you talking about the importance of being joyful about that. So when we're talking about the serious things, I don't ever want to be joyless about it, or it's all doom. I don't believe in that. I believe that this contrast is the thing that we need to drive us finally into the light proper, in a balanced way, in a balanced, soft way, including the feminine spirit that you talked about, and that's what the universe, from a multitude of directions, is pushing us towards, to rediscover those powers and to rediscover the counterintuitive thing of the drop of water that wears away the stone. We have to believe these, or in martial arts context, in the judo, the gentle way, the way that you can use the momentum of the other person to bring them down if you begin to think about it correctly. And I think we need to think in those, to use those mechanisms and ideas in a way, and not put people down. There's a tendency that I don't like at the moment, say, well, because of your religious beliefs, you can't be on the team here, that's solving the world's problems, or you believe in this, or you're a Muslim. This is nonsense. I'm a pragmatic cosmopolitan. So if you're saying the right things, I will support you, even though your views are quite radically different to mine, assuming you're not like one of them, But we need to be pragmatic and cosmopolitan in our perspectives. And this judgmental thing, well, which says, for example, that, well, you come from a Catholic background, you're indoctrinated, and therefore you can't. But my argument is, let's take over these things, take them back, go back to look at what were the Irish monks doing? They were doing the same thing that you guys were doing, with plants and understanding plants and cultivating plants.
Alchemy.
They were the expert. That was that was their love of the immanent God in nature, and that was prayer as well, and it was all there, and that was in the rubric of a thing. I believe in Ireland that the Druids moved into Catholic Christianity voluntarily because of the Dark Ages that had happened with the volcanic eruption. But what I'm saying is, let's be complex, let's be open, let's retrieve the wisdom of those traditions and begin to apply it in a different context without putting people into the boxes. And the possession thing, we have to be very, very careful that we're not possessed. You can be possessed by a philosophy, an ideology, and these things are ideological as well as the technology, and as well as by an entity. And the fullness of your own spiritual realization is the thing that protects you. By connecting with the highest, whether you conceive that as the Archangel Michael or Lao Tzu, or whatever way works for you, or the Buddha, these are the connections that we want to orientate us in opposition to adversarial forces, and they work.
There's some interesting work done by Trevor Constable, who was a student of Wilhelm Reich and others, and he was able to chronicle the existence of external entities through infrared photography. And these he described as interdimensional beings. There's pictures of them, that are available in his books and so forth. And he also worked with these entities on a conscious level as far as learning communication techniques in order to access, a vocabulary with them. And he described some as just being completely indifferent to us, some as being completely unaware of our, existence, just like most of us are of them. And then he also described a minority of these entities that were actually quite malevolent and working against us. So my take from that is that, I think some of these folks that fancy themselves as Satanists or whatever are deliberately conjuring up communication lines with these ones that are maybe working against our interests and who they deem are going to allow them to gather power on the earthly level as well. So, yeah, I think these entities exist as far as we can conjure them up, we can communicate with them, and we can also decide which ones to communicate with. And I think just one last comment about all the technologies that we're discussing relative to controlling people. I think some of the best technologies are really low tech. For instance, trauma. I think a lot of our professional programs like medical training and legal training so far are all trauma-based. MK Ultra is trauma-based. And then also all we have to do is look around us, and there seems to be this great inclination to create trauma on every level in our lives. So I think they've been doing a good job fragmenting our personalities and disconnecting us from source, just with some low-tech ways as well.
There's no question. And of course, where did that knowledge came from? It came from, in particular, in London, with all the big pool of returning men from the 200,000 men that couldn't do anything. Their nerves were gone, understandably. So they experimented on them. And the same, Dunkirk was the other one. all these people evacuated, and they suffered massive trauma. So they began to experiment on them, and that's where William Sargent's work came from. And William Sargent was the one that would have influenced a lot of the theories in the United States. So they have a big pool of people from there, and they understood the power of the creation of trauma and how that would be able to even change people's mind and how it worked. And that ties into Michael Nell's and the indoctrinated mind and the idea of the disestablishment of the hippocampus and memory thing and breaking that up. And again, with the symbolism, the hippocampus and the horse in the mind, as well as the snake image. But there's no question. It's the same thing about that trying to get on our nerves. So getting on our nerves, literally. And so some of the things we think of as just as annoying have a function. We're living in a permanent revolution, a permanent cultural revolution every day now. Yeah. So the only way you're going to be able to be sane is by retaining that concept of who you are. So that's justified and vindicated by whether you take Ian McGilchrist or Jordan Peterson or whoever. They all vindicate the reality of this necessity to maintain coherence. Now, this is an important concept as well. In a lot of where I differ from a lot of the traditions, the Indian tradition, is I believe that we maintain coherence when we move into the next world, that the essence of you maintains its coherence, which a lot of people don't believe in. A lot of people believe, especially the people that don't believe too much in the afterlife, well, you're the drop of water going into the ocean. I don't believe that, but I believe that coherence is critical to maintain here as well. And not only, it's not just an obligation or protective measure, it's the essence of who we are. It's the essence of joy. It's the essence of bliss in the Eastern concept of consciousness, truth, etc. So we have to maintain that in ourselves. It's the only thing we have control over ultimately. So we have an incentive to do it now for ourselves to survive and afterwards, and also to begin to form the necessary network. Because the countering thing, for me, to refer back to Mike's emphasis on what we do about it, is that we have to protect ourselves first. And when we protect ourselves, we're aligning with the good, the true, and the beautiful as much as we can. And by definition, you move into a different zone. The people that are in the pop star abuser or whatever context, they will move into their own zones too. So we begin to align in the mystic murmur. There is a benefit to the individual. The individual gives a benefit to other people by doing so, by increasing their, whatever you want to call it, resonance or coming into accord or whatever. And out of there becomes the possibilities of a new approach, because we have to think differently for the solutions. They're not there yet in relation to how we interact. We certainly have to be pragmatic, as Mike talks about using technology as appropriate. We can't go backwards in some. We have to integrate. We have to have different emphasis, but we have to move on to a different level and begin to invoke these spiritual gifts, which come when you practice them, when you believe in them. So we have to actually instantiate this movement toward ourselves or contribute toward. We can only do that by believing in the path and by committing to the path. And I believe that we will have a process of emergence when there is a sufficient movement together and sufficient support. And I just say, a lot of people, I usually, when I talk about these things, I get people telling me that they're being attacked and all that. I understand that by technology and that. Unfortunately, I cannot help people. I can't do it. I'd love to be able to do it. What I'm trying to do is to try and encourage other people to take this seriously. So, for example, that people with deep pockets, and there are plenty out there, begin to say, okay, well, a useful thing I could do for those type of people is set up some foundation which will be able to tell them whether they have any foreign objects in their bodies which are of nanotechnological context. So that would require a unique technological, response to that. But that will be done, and in future, more and more people would want that. Someone will make a lot of money out of such a business. Do I have any dust in my body? How can I deactivate it, for example? These are real things, not only for the mind control and all the other stuff. Anyone can put stuff into your body. You can get it up your nose. You can get it transdermally. Anybody can do it now. So it's a real big problem. There needs to be a technological response from people that can provide countermeasures, which include monitoring whether people have foreign objects or sensor objects in their body, and how to get rid of them, how to prevent them, etc. So I think that there's a technological response that needs to be made. That they will only happen when people present the problem, present the opportunity and need out there. There's a lot of people suffering from belief. Now, whether their belief is true or not is a different issue. But in some cases, they will have something inserted in their body, from whether it's from security services or God knows what. So I think that there will be so much dust around that there will be a need to be able to see to get the glasses like in We Live, so they can see what's in the environment without talking about other entities. We want to see technological entities that are around us.
Well, I'll just say one thing. Our friend Eileen McCusick, who's really been revolutionary in her biofield tuning, which she often talks about, is it's not about the New Age concept of raising your vibration. It's about coming in tune with your coherence.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's really crucial to understand. And, like what Walter Russell talks about, well, when you raise your vibration, you're actually increasing the heat, and you're actually increasing the energetic frenzy of the nerve-wracking condition, if you will. So you don't want to raise the vibration. I love that idea of coherence. And we've seen with like water experiments and stuff, and with like the Emoto Institute and all sorts of other elements around resonance, is that when you are truly coherent, you affect others' fields in that coherency, which can counter, the systems of.
Well, to support or my support in relation to Eileen's viewpoint is my idea of accord, which is why I wrote the first book when I came out of the closet. was the closet of scientism and all that. When I came out of that and said, okay, I'm going to tell people what I believe about spiritual consciousness, and unashamedly, and to encourage them as well. And I'm going to break some of those as far as I can. The taboo was the mystical accord, was the idea of coming into accord. It goes back to Pythagoras, and accord is associated with the heart. That's where the word comes from. It means agreement, but it's about that. It's about not increasing it's about coming into accord. It's the identification. It's what you do in the near-death experience. You come into accord with the experience of the other person. It's what you do when you're communicating with animals. It's what you do when you're communicating with your plants. And what Goethe told us about trying to come in their shoes, if you like, or into the pots for the plants, or into their to understand it, to understand the ideal behind it, as Goethe talked about, the Urplan, which goes back to Plato and all that. It's about our identification. So to come into accord, and coming into accord also means agreement. We have accord, and as John Hume used to say in Northern Ireland when they were going through the peace process, agreement threatens no one. If you're going to agree something, it shouldn't, and it's not under duress, it shouldn't threaten anybody. So I say, let's maximize the agreement that we can get among the people that are critical. Put aside the little things you have. For example, the people that come from an English materialist background, they hate stuff about spirituality. They can't stand it because it's been beaten out of them for hundreds of years. And really, it's been taken out. So when you talk about spirit stuff, they cannot bear it. A lot of my friends and that. So some of them will have to put it aside and say, okay, well, I don't understand that, but I can still communicate with this person. I can still talk to this person. I can still see that this person, is coming to a same conclusion from a different perspective. be pragmatic, be cosmopolitan, come into accord. And then we get the greater accord, which will be a natural accord. It will not be structured so that it can be broken down. If we are united by a common accord, which is invisible, unstructured, it's not written in bonds of blood, it's through a voluntary association of the best of ourselves, well, then we will create an instrument which will combat what they're creating is of course the cloud, and the idea is a cloud capital, but this is the mechanical cloud to replace all the spiritual clouds that existed since time immemorial. Whether you're talking about the Navajo creation stories, or you're talking about in Taoism, or you're talking about the clouds that brought God to earth in the past, they are saying we are making that cloud now. That's a cloud of dust. That's what it is. A big cloud of dust, like the people saw when they were singing the song "So Long It's Been Good to Know You" when they're in Oklahoma and that, and they say this is what they will create again through mechanization, over farming, not respecting the thing that's there, forcing bad economic models, bad financial models, bad agricultural practices. They're doing the same thing in relation to the human consciousness itself, in relation to farming of us. Yeah, so I agree with those sentiments. Come into accord that there is a desire for a lot of spiritual seekers to seek some ultimate final experience. This is what Timothy Leary advocated, that kind of garish glare that he talks about in the High Priest. And I don't agree with that. That's a sensational, a physiological thing. That's not what spirituality is about. This kind of, I had this fantastic experience, and you can tell all your mates about, or in the pub or whatever like that. That's about sensation, and a physiological sensation that can have a psychic element. It's not really what spirituality is about. So in spirituality, again, emphasizes interconnection, care, and guardianship, custodianship, respect for the entity that you're dealing with, the plants or whatever, respect for the sea, respect for the Tao of the sea and how that works. And we know that they're destroying the atmosphere now. We know that because they hate nature. There's another strong tradition in the materialism that hates all this mucky stuff, all the good stuff, all the compost. They fear all that kind of stuff. And that's what we have to embrace. We have to embrace the earth that we came from, that the spirit is infused in, the dust that makes us.
That's why on our channel from day one, our overriding message has been get outside and create coherence with nature, get reconnected. One final comment about technology. I love technology. I'm not against it. On the other hand, when we externalize our power into that technology, of course, that's when we have the problems. But one thing that escapes, I think, most of us is that technology cannot be brought forth in an externalized form unless it already exists within ourselves. So I absolutely agree with you that there will be technologies, and it's important to develop those that will help bring us through whatever we're facing right now. But I don't think we have to wait for that technology, and we have the ability to tap into that ourselves. And I think that's what we see some people doing right now that seem to be rising above the fracas. So again, not at all suggesting that we don't acknowledge that there's some real forces deliberately working against us, but within a proper context, I don't think we have anything to fear as well.
Bring back the bells. There's a great conspiracy rabbit hole around how all the cathedrals and all the buildings from not that long ago had large bells on them that would ring a coherent resonance that would counter.
I had that in my childhood in our neighborhood. We had the Catholic church, and the bell rang there every so often, and it's just part of the community.
Yeah, and supposedly they took them all down to melt them into bullets for the world wars. It is interesting.
An interesting point in that, talking about, I'm going back to your original question about what's happening over here. One thing that is interesting is, I haven't been back to Scotland for a long time, but Scotland, I think, a population of 5.5 million, if I'm not mistaken. But the figures that I saw since I left there was that 1 million people have left the Church of Scotland. Quite extraordinary. Now, I believe that's the figure I saw. I don't dispute that. I've talked to people, Episcopalian Church of Scotland. Nearly all the Protestant churches are being closed down across Scotland. Quite remarkable. Quite remarkable. Same thing is happening here in Sweden. Now, you can buy churches cheaply. It's remarkable transformation. And you have to remember that in many senses, the state church here, which was an established church, but it became disestablished, but then people began to leave it. So it's still notionally quite strong. But according to the figures, most of the people don't believe in God. The vast majority in the church don't believe in God. It's about something else. So you have this remarkable transformation going on in relation to some places that are very old. Some of these churches would have been taken over as, Catholic churches, of course, before that, and going back and tradition, going back to the monks and all this. It's a radical transformation of Europe, as well as that. If we go down through European churches, they make it difficult to get into the churches. Security guards, unbelievable. There's various reasons, cultural reasons, and there was this strange thing, and I noticed going down through Europe this time, there was an awful lot of electrical work going on, electricity again, very bad electrical work, terrible stuff going on in beautiful buildings, looking bad, inappropriate, and of course there's been a load of electrical fires in these churches. Now, Chartres was the cathedral that led Henry Adams to think about Inversion and the Dynamo. And of course, the Americans wanted to bomb Chartres during the Second World War. There was no threat to them. They claimed there was Nazis hiding in it, but they wanted to destroy it. There was this effort, part of the evil process, to destroy everything. When Notre Dame, Our Lady, was burned in Paris, there was famous people here saying things like, "Oh, finally," they were gloating about the destruction. So this evidences a deep destructiveness. People don't, as well as I've talked before about the Nigerian Catholics being killed. If you look at another thing that people forgot about, there was beautiful churches in Norway that were burned by Satanists, and wooden churches that were hundreds of years or absolutely beautiful buildings. And again, they were destroyed. So the satanic thing is not people talk about the satanic panic, and I understand when things get out of, but there's plenty of evidence of a destructive, active force to destroy what they regard as terrible, combined with the fact that despite the satanic panic, it's generally accepted that in criminal law and criminological context, that satanic issues are taken out of reporting about cases, or they're taken out from a jury context because they're deemed too prejudicial, which as a result, they don't come into play in the process. So these things are real forces. Europe is radically transformed. And some of the, what are the reasons why they have to, it's deemed uneconomic, these churches, because of the electricity thing, because of the cost of electricity or insulation, or it doesn't, it's a cod. It's a cod. These are run by big legal firms who are committed to globalism from the 1920s. In the United States, the big legal firm were committed to achieving globalism, and they're going to destroy every other opposition, which is why the Catholic Church was the one that they wanted to, whether a communist or the capitalist, that might have been an opponent. So that's why they invest so much money in destroying, and have been very successful. The Protestant churches are going in Europe, and of course, Islam is growing because they will use that to create a wedge. It's not Islam's fault. They're being used by the various forces that are bombing their countries. So it's a remarkable transformation. It really is a remarkable transformation. So that is ongoing before our eyes in rapid time. So very shortly, in a number of countries, the tradition that was there for a long time will be gone, and it'll be a distant memory, and it will be portrayed as an evil force that took over from the enlightened, scientific potential that was there in the multicultural society that has been created by the plantation process that we've talked about. So that is remarkable, and I urge people to learn their history, because there's an awful lot of people in the movement that I agree with, but they have no idea about European history, and when they talk about the certain of the things, or we didn't get around to the Black Legend, but what I find interesting is that the Black Legend basically was the propaganda that the British Empire came up with to put the Spanish down when they were involved in the Peninsular Wars in the context of the struggle against Napoleon. And so they concocted awful stories about the Spanish that went on and still go on because people repeat them as truth. And these influence kind of ideas, say, for example, the Spanish Inquisition. There was more priests killed in the Spanish Civil War, like in my father's time, in less than 5 years, than was killed in the entire Spanish Inquisition over 500 years. So, and these people, who are these people that are involved in it? The Stalinists and the Trotskyites that were fighting each other, including George Orwell and all these, the intellectuals from America. And they present, some of these things are very close. It was a very brutal from both sides, and right and left, what was going on. But in relation to the history, people are repeating as fact what was promulgated as propaganda, say, against the Spanish, which had no basis in reality. The Black Legend, that it was called, was a propaganda campaign that went on. So when I hear people telling me history, which is not based on scholarly work, which is accessible, which requires one goes and reads this stuff and assesses it, I find that dispiriting. So there is, as a lot of people said, not just in Catholic theology, but in Protestant theology, that a lot of evil is or we find the same in Eastern theology, and a lot of evil is based on ignorance. They define evil in terms of not knowing what they should have done. And ignorance is afflicting the people that should be saving the world. So if they don't know about something, they should just shut up about it, because they, when they start talking about things they don't know about. I did a bit of legal history, and I studied legal history, and going through all the old gory stuff to understand what the Magna Carta was, where it came from, how it was, how it exists, where our rights come from. A lot of people that are talking about our right have no idea where they came from, have no idea what they mean, have no idea. In Ireland, I think this week, I think it was passed, was a bill, for example, in the Senate to define gender as meaning basically anything that you want to do. Incredible changes. These are changes that are going on because people have no idea what the legal system is that underpins all this, and they're not interested in it. So they will just take out stuff which is, easy to digest. So we all have to have a better game in relation to integrating our knowledge in relation to propositions that we make in relation to history. That doesn't preclude us from being critical or doing the critical stuff that you're doing in relation to the theories that are there. That's a testament to that endeavor. Go back and look at these accepted things and say, is this true, or is this just another legend, another made up story? Because people confuse that simulacrum of truth with the truth itself.
And we have a sizable population now that is incapable of discerning the truth just through simple observation. So it does get a bit disheartening sometimes. Yes. James, before we wrap it up, can you give us a little quick tease about your upcoming book release?
It should be out in the next week. I didn't want to say the name on that because I think it jinxes it in some way, and I don't like talking about things before I've done them. So I think it'll be out in a week. And what it does is explain the relationship between AI and governance. So if if there's one thing that I'd like people to take out and to talk in terms of, is governance. It's all about governance. Everything is about governance. And come back to earlier theories, we either are governed by whatever you want to call it, God, the divine nature, and we accord with that. We accord with the good, the true, and the beautiful in the Greek sense, or we don't. So as opposed to this nasty form of psychopathic governance that they're going to inflict upon us. So the book should be out. I'll put it on Amazon. I think it's important, and I really want to get people to think. It's not about this. It's not about that. This is the central issue. This is what they've been doing. This is what the entirety of science, as we know it, is geared towards. And whatever else, it's geared towards this, and the evidence is there. And in that sense, if I can explain that, having come from a legal background where I understand these things, if it makes sense to people, it may help them interpret the world. And I try to be a bit positive, be a bit positive in the book as well. All the things that you talk about, I support that in relation to understanding the natural world, getting out in the natural world, admiring the natural world, being involved, participating, communicating with the lake as you're swimming, communicating with the sea, communicating with the spiritual base that is there, communicating with the divine, communicating with the highest, respecting that as well. In that people, when you talked about, you mentioned something earlier on that reminded me, when you're given to the land, when you're fertilizing the land, this is really what the sacrifice is about. It's about contributing, giving something back to recognize what's there and to facilitate its persistence. So I hope it's a critical but positive thing. And the more we know, when we say, okay, I understand that now. I didn't understand the different things, but there is something here that helps me understand something. Then we can begin to unleash the power that we have, the potential. Everyone has this secret room in them, this secret spring that they can open, the hidden aqueduct that Machado talks about in his poetry, that is open, divinely inspired, that the water flows through. We have to open those sluice gates now. So in the work that you're doing, or hopefully I'm doing, we begin to present whatever dark message is and present the light, not to be dispiriting, but to combat that. So hopefully in the next week, I'm going to travel for a bit, for a few days, and then it should be out. So I won't say the name, not to jinx it, but hopefully there's some new concepts, a lot of new words in there, which may just explain or encapsulate or grasp some of these things that I know are true, and that haven't studied them and I don't think you'll have any problem in accepting that they accord with your own perspectives from the different parallax that we come from.
Wonderful.
I very much enjoy your books, James. You tie things together so well, and man, you're prolific. It's not like you're putting out 100 pagers here. Is this another tome you're releasing?
Yeah, it's a bit big. In fact, my wife is saying, well, what about your painting? Because I have loads and the painting is coming back, and I really have to get on with that. I have a stack of books that there's a stack of books that I haven't finished. I get prodded to get the book, particular things out at a particular time, and say, okay, well, this is the one that you have to go. I have a book on Trotsky, for example, which is a critical figure that people don't understand. One of the major figures that is ignored, and I don't hear about it. Really, really phenomenally important.
Do you connect Trotsky to London and to the nefarious intelligence forces there?
Very shortly, I'll be near the spot where he met Lenin for the first time in London.
Mm-hmm.
Where did he go? Where did he come from when he was going to Russia? they were all, his supporters were coming from New York. The Secret Service was saying, "Oh, who are these guys? Where are they going? Why are they coming to New York? What other places were they in?" They met in Switzerland in the famous group of Bolsheviks. Very, very important meeting. They're in Vienna in the Café Royal, 1913. Remember as well, Hitler was there in 1913. Stalin was there. Steiner was there. Quite incredible, in the Café Royal. And the guy, one of the ministers, saying, "Oh, well, maybe we should get one of these revolutionaries to run Russia, maybe like Trotsky over there." That's on record. So is he related to that? Absolutely. Not only that.
I never heard of Steiner being connected in there. Sorry,
no, he wasn't involved. It just happened. He was in that milieu. That's why he saw in his work, he is telling what is coming. He feels it coming, and it's in his lectures. He describes this Ahrimanic force which is coming, and a lot of it is related to detecting this which is going around. It's quite remarkable, and it corresponds in his lectures. If you look up on the in around September 1913, he predicts really what's coming. He senses, he knows what's coming, and that's why the darkness is there, because he's in the honeypot. But all these honeypots are coming from like Vienna, as we said, Switzerland, London, associate with the power thing. Not only that, but of course, when Trotsky's in prison, he's studying esoteric things that people forget about. And there was an argument that when he was going around during the Civil War, that he was trying to portray himself as a satanic figure with a black train, and there's a lot of evidence again. And again, in that context, the intellectuals, a lot of them well-intentioned, in Moscow, were taught mythology was the big thing they were looking at. Nietzsche was the big influence on the Bolshevik things, as well as the Nazis. This idea of superhuman, we can do it, there's no restraint. It's deadly. It's absolutely deadly thing. Now, when they are deadly with the mechanical system, it's not good. But the occult thing is there. The connection with power is there. It's kind of remarkable. And the last point, what was the main lesson that comes out of that stream? We see it in Gramsci. The idea was entryism, which goes back to the scientists in London. Huxley, you enter into the organization and you change it. That goes back. They did it scientifically to take the spirit out. So the Bolsheviks, Trotsky, Gramsci, they do that. They say, you have to destroy the Catholic Church, and part of it is by going into the organizations. So the people that are not getting elected to parliament are running your schools, are running your local supermarkets, are running the football teams, are running whatever. And if you look at, again, there's all the graphs, Antifa, for example, it's a recent phenomenon that, like this, if we go back, they fit into all this. It's a combined effort in the context of fifth generation warfare, neuro warfare, psi war, as Malone is calling it, which is a war against us. It's a war against their own people. So there is not your government anymore. There is a war against us. And Trotsky, as a major player, look at people, even like conservatives in America. Gene Kirkpatrick, I think, with the one of the ones that created this intervention in El Salvador and Central America. They were former Trotskyists. All this project for New American Century, former Trotskyists. Tony Blair, Christopher Hitchens. I'm not surprised he's arguing against God. His brother, Hitchens' brother said, everyone said, "Oh, I love Hitchens, he's great. Hitchens' brother says they were Trotskyists and they had a vision that they would wade through a sea of blood to reach their paradise." His brother says that clearly. This is what Hitchens was about. And they do, not just them, but other groups as well, allied to this environmentalism, allied to the capitalism. They intend to destroy millions of people. this was there in the Weather Underground, even with people like Tim Leary. They were going to kill tens of millions of Americans. So I mean, the people that glorify them and glorify their supposed liberation are glorifying a freedom of Jimmy Savile. The same that Jimmy Savile thought, it's a freedom from restraint. It's a demonic freedom. So yeah, it's another story, and it's
that'll be fun to
nuanced.
bring you back on to dive into that, and always a pleasure having you on, James.
Yeah.
Definitely, guys, go check out James' website, jamestunney.com, and we have.
And just to say, I have to say thank you very much for the conversation. It's always heartwarming, always a pleasure. Feel like old friends at this stage, and I appreciate your work. And again, your example, the two of you, keep other people going and provide inspiration, and that's a very useful thing. Right? Thank you for that.
Thank you, James, and always a pleasure as well.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. And remember to get outside, get your feet in the dirt, go plant something, go show Mother Nature some love. She'll show it right back to you in spades. And we'll see you next Thursday. I believe we have Topher Gardner on for next Thursday. There is a man who's putting his hands in the dirt. That'll be a great convo. And we appreciate you, love you. We'll see you next time. Thanks.